So last time we were talking about the foundations of moral philosophy and what makes a ethical theory valid based on rational analysis, and then we started to briefly get into Socratic thought. So I think I told you all that we know about Socrates from his most famous student, Plato, and also from the poet Xenophon. And I want to talk about Socrates' idea of justice, because we talked about this when you all did your critical thinking challenge on what is justice. And some of the things that you all brought out in that were touched upon by Socrates. So what Socrates looks for when we talk about the Socratic dialogue, we have to break, or the Platonic dialogues, into early, middle, and late. And some of the ideas that are very worked out in some of the early dialogues are jettisoned in some of the later dialogues. But Republic is the first really fleshed out system of philosophy in the Western world that we have. There may have been people who had a fully worked out system of philosophy before Socrates and before the Platonic dialogues, but perhaps those were lost to antiquity. And the reason these are important for marketers is because a lot of times students tell me, what is an ancient Greek who lived before even the 1st century AD have to say that's at all relevant to the modern world, given the fact that Socrates could never have thought about or imagined things like airplanes and cars and microwaves. And the answer is that it turns out that influence has quite a bit to do with our thinking, even today, even though you may not realize it and you haven't read any of Plato's works, perhaps, they have had influence. So in Republic, Socrates, he goes to this party, and he's asking people questions. What is justice? And he begins a dialogue with his interlocutors. And so, what is justice? One of the people at the party that I think it's Thrasymachus, that talks to Socrates, says, well, justice is the will of the stronger. Right? Justice is whoever has the power, they make the rule. That's justice. This one's pretty easy for Socrates to dispense with, although we see this being applied in the modern world all the time, even in business. The idea is that, I hire you, I tell you what to do, and it's my way or the highway. How many of you have heard this? From, it's my way or the highway for a boss, or your parent, right? And it's not intellectually satisfying, but it does seem to be the way the world works, doesn't it? If I have the power, you will do things in this class that you would probably rather not do, like take exams, write an article review, and you'd probably rather dispense with that and not do anything. You'd be happy. Again, I've said this multiple times in here. Education is the only thing where you're happy with less. If we cancel class, we're just thrilled. More is or less is more. And if I just sort of handed out A's like they were candied mints, you all would just be perfectly fine with that for the most part. Thomas Jefferson founds the first publicly funded secular institution of higher education in the world. It's called the University of Virginia. Still there. Before Jefferson's University of Virginia, institutions of higher education were always associated with the church. It was the church that started them and passed them on. And Jefferson's idea when he founded the University of Virginia was not that it would become a place that granted degrees, but rather people would come, he would bring the best scholars from around the world, people would come, they would listen to the lecture, and they would leave when they felt educated. And I asked students, how many of you would do that? What is it that brings you here at 8 o'clock in the morning? Well, for most of you, it's this piece of paper that when you graduate says, I am educated. And I can take, that and go get a job. How many of you would sit here just for the thrill of listening to my voice drone on about these things? Well, not many. I would submit. I always have one student who's sort of a kiss up that says I'm, because they think that's the answer that I want to hear, right? That's what professors want to hear, is that you're just yearning for knowledge. Most of us got these degrees, and the reason I got a PhD was because I'm lazy. And I wanted a job that paid 6 figures a year and allowed me to have 3 months off. Right? There's very few jobs that do that. Marketing professor is one. Like, not all professors are equal, by the way. If I'd gotten a PhD in political science, I'd be making $45,000 a year and be lucky to have a job. There are not a whole lot of people with PhDs in marketing, and so that's the reason I went to PhD school. Was so that I could get a job and sit here and yammer at you, and make 6 figures, right? The average starting salary for a marketing professor, with a person with a PhD in marketing today, is $160,000. The average starting salary for an accounting professor is something like $180,000. They make more money than me. I don't know why. It's not a fully integrated function of the firm. And God knows, I have no idea how you stay awake long enough to get a PhD in accounting. I could barely stay awake through my 2 accounting classes that I had to have. Yeah.
Does it depend on the 2-year or 4-year institute?
The PhD requires generally, well, depending on where you go, you can do it in 4 to 5 years.
I meant like the salary.
For what?
Like a marketing professor at a 2-year institute.
Oh no, they don't. But they don't have to have a PhD.
Oh, okay.
If you go to a junior college, you only have to have the master's degree. So, and they have a hard time hiring people, because if you have a master's degree, an MBA, and your specialty is marketing or sales, why the hell would you? They make $45,000 or $50,000 a year. Why would you do that when you can go out and make more money selling, right? Unless you're just kind of like me. But those were my job requirements. Was $100,000 a year, 9 months, right? And it's not even really 9 months, because we get a month off at birth, we get 3 weeks off at Christmas, and then we get a week off at spring break. So that's it really comes out to being about 8 months, right? And so it's a good job. Okay? And the reason I got it, the reason I have this degree on my wall, is so that I could have that kind of job. It gives me a lot of flexibility, and I can do other things, and that's great. And that's why most of you are here, because you want to get a job. Those of you that are in professional sales, you're going to make a lot of money with that degree. You're going to go out. We have a very high success rate of placement in our professional sales program, and a very high rate of success in terms of monetary compensation in those fields, and that's why you're here. So, but that wasn't what Jefferson wanted. He wanted this to be a place that you came and learned and left and you felt educated. Nobody would go there, so they are a degree-granting institution. So all of this is to say that in Republic, what we see this idea of the absolute sense of justice being discussed, and might makes right is dispensed with rather quickly by Socrates. He says, that's the way the world works, but that's not what you need the philosopher for. Telling you the way the world works, that's the business of the sociologist, or that's the business of the psychologist, or that's somebody else. But you need a philosopher to tell you what is the best that we can become. The next idea that's put up, and this one is more difficult for Socrates, is one of the ones that you all came up with, which is called the distributive theory of justice, giving people their just deserts. And that seems to be intuitively appealing, if and particularly for marketers, right? This idea of distributed justice. If I pay for something, I should get what I am paying for. Is there ever a time that doesn't work, where giving somebody what's their due doesn't really work? This one's harder for Socrates to dispense with. So, could you ever think of a time when I shouldn't give you what is rightfully yours? Well, the example, they didn't have guns, but I'll use a more contemporary example. We're fascinated in this state by guns, aren't we? It's a huge business in Oklahoma, guns are. And every time a Democrat is elected, people run out and they buy more guns because they're terrified that they're going to start losing the ability to, purchase guns easily because, God forbid the Democrat gets elected and we, have some kind of restriction on guns that you can have. Is there any need for anybody to have a fully automatic weapon other than the military? You think so? You think we need for what? Deer hunting? You're going hunting. I mean, you're going to kill Bambi with a fully automatic weapon.
I just know there's really bad people in this world, and if I'm a homeowner with my family and I'm sleeping in the middle of the night and 2 or 3 people come and intrude into my property,
Oh, you
I
mean
would
that?
like to feel like I am capable of protecting everyone in the house without question.
Okay.
That's just me personally. From someone who is trained in the weapon, I prefer to be able to know how. I think the education process behind it gets people a little turned off by it, but
So I have a concealed carry permit, right? And the reason I got this, and I have a number of weapons. My father was an FBI agent, so we grew up shooting and hunting. My father and my grandfather were big hunters. I no longer hunt because I would prefer. Although I watched a movie called Food Inc. several years ago, and I really thought about becoming a vegetarian. You see how poorly animals are treated, and that lasted until lunch when I got hungry and I decided I needed a hamburger anyway. So, but I would prefer to think in my little deluded mind that the cow just fell over dead, and they cut him up, right? I take no joy in killing anything. I do like to go shoot, trap, and ski in sporting plays. I think that's a lot of fun, and you don't have to clean anything afterwards. When I was a hunter, when I was a young kid, I'd go out with my grandfather and my father. I did go hunting, by the way, for the first time, I guess, 2 years ago. My father, who is now in his 80s, and he's in enormously good health. For a man in his 80s, he's very thin and very fit. He plays golf 4 times a week and tennis. And I thought, this is not going to last forever. I mean, he's in his 80s and he wanted to go hunting. And so we went up to where we used to have a cabin in northern New Mexico, and we went grouse hunting. And the reason I agreed to go is because I've gone grouse hunting many, many times, and I've never actually seen a grouse. So this seemed to be a very safe bet to me that we're not going to. And we didn't see any grouse. They're an elusive bird, so it seemed like a safe thing to do. On Labor Day weekend, we went up to northern New Mexico and camped out on Elk Mountain and went grouse hunting. And it was a lot of fun. Didn't see any grouse, but it was a great bonding experience between my brother and my father and I. But I don't really want to kill anything. So we have this fascination with guns. Let's suppose that you tell me that you have this great shotgun and I should borrow it from you and use it to go shoot sporting clays because it's an over-under and it's just got the right choke and all of that you need to shoot sporting clay. Well, now let's suppose that when I go to give you the gun back after trying this, your eyes are spinning. You've obviously gotten hopped up on the cocaine now. And you're talking about, because you're very agitated, about how Professor Kaiser has given you an F in his sales class and he's no dang good. And you're going to take him out. You're going to climb the Tower of Old North and take him out. Should I give you the gun back?
Probably not gonna hit it with a shotgun. The top of a little north.
You can put a slug in the shotgun, so it's not. That's actually how you hunt things like elephants with a shotgun, not with a rifle. You put a slug in them. Very deadly. Right? Instead of having the pellets, it has a solid piece of lead or something. So, you know, he could very well shoot Bob Kaiser
Yeah.
with the gun.
Wouldn't be a good idea to give it back.
Wouldn't be, but that's giving them their due, isn't it? And that is
Bob or the person with the gun?
the gun. I mean, that's giving them what they deserve. They own it. It's theirs. It's their property right. Shouldn't I give it back? Well, Socrates says no. I mean, in that instance, even though that's their property, it's what they're due, we shouldn't do that. So after dispensing with this argument on justice, they say, you know, all you do is you talk down to Socrates and you come up and poke holes. What is justice for you? Well, the first time I read this in Republic, I thought this guy is crazy, and it took me a long time to really think about this and realize that there is something to this. So Socrates talks about a cave, and it's called the allegory of the cave, and it's the best worked allegory in all of literature, probably. And you should read it for yourself sometimes. By the way, Republic is an easy book to read. It's written like a play. It's not like Aristotle's treatises, which are dry and sort of boring. So you have this cave, right? And you're going to see that I'm not much of an artist. And let's suppose you have these people that are living in the cave, and they are not allowed to go out, and they are tethered or fixed in such a way that all they can do is look at the wall at the end of the cave. And you have behind them a large fire. Again, my artistic ability is not very good. And people walk along or behind, in front of the fire and behind them, and those images are projected up onto the cave wall. Now, they were born and raised in the cave. What are they going to think is reality? Well, they're going to think that the projections on the wall are reality. They might even start forming a society if they can communicate with each other. And the ones that are going to be the heads of the society are the ones that become good at predicting what's happening on that wall. Now, let's suppose one of them is unshackled and forced to turn around. Well, what's going to happen is he's going to realize that everything that he thought was reality, this shadows on the wall, is an illusion. And let's suppose even more that he's then forced out of the cave and into the light. He's going to realize that everything that he thought before is really an illusion. So what Socrates says is, he never says what is the absolute concept of justice. What he says is that this is the philosopher, the person who sees the absolute truth. Most of us don't ever see the absolute truth. We live in illusions. We live in what I call functional fictions that cloud our ability to see things truly. What's a functional fiction? Well, I'll give you one of my functional fictions, right? One of my functional fictions is that I come down here on, that was another part of my requirements for a job. I can only work 2 days a week, right? So, and that's all I do. I work Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I'm out of here. That's not true. I do research, which I do, at home primarily, or I travel and I interview people and I do some qualitative research on these kinds of things. So it's more than that. But, in theory, the only place that I have to be at any given time is on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 8 and 9:15, or 9:30 to 10:45. The rest of the time I can sort of adjust my schedule accordingly. So I can work on my research, or I can grade papers. I can do that. Since everything's turned into D2L, I can do that at home now, right? And, grading papers is hard. It takes a lot of time, but I can do it while I'm doing other things, like, watching Oprah, whatever it is that I choose to watch that day, MSNBC usually. One of my functional fictions is that I come down here and I make these videos and I yap at you, and that you all actually, appreciate it and get something out of it. And I'm transforming the world. We're all about transformative learning here at UCO, and I am transforming you and making you a better person. Right? Probably most of you will information dump everything that I said 30 seconds after the exam, and it will mean nothing to you. You just get it, it's like, I did this when I was an undergraduate as well, I have to admit. I would come out of a test and, one of my friends would say, what did you put for number 13? I didn't remember what number 13 was, 30 seconds after I turned up in the exam, I didn't remember what number 13 was or what I put on anything. And, I just wanted to get it over with and move on. So that's one of my functional patients. We engage in a lot of these as human beings. But Socrates says there are people that are really special that think about these things very deeply. And they see things clearly. They have an idea of the absolute sense of justice. And we should follow these people. From this, you get the idea of the philosopher king. And so he works out an entire system of governance that's based on everybody giving their part to the republic. In republic, it's a community. Everybody gives what they are best at to the community. And he talks about men of bronze and men of silver and men of gold. And your men of bronze are the ones that are going to work, do hard labor, produce things. Your men of silver are going to be your merchants and people who understand business and things like that. And your men of gold are going to be the guardians that guard the republic, the thinkers. This is what you get in the republic. Now, from this, what you can get, and the reason it's important for marketers is because from this, you get the tenets of communism. You get the foundation of communism. And in a communist system, they rely heavily on marketing. It is a forced logistical system, right? But they rely on marketing. Communists rely just as much on marketing as the tenets or the foundations of marketing, we'll talk about this, are logistics. And so everybody gives to their society that which they are capable of. And that's justice. And it's the philosopher king who will see things clearly, who this on earth, he talks about the realm of the forms. This is an imperfect representation. I think this is a desk, not a table. We talked about this, right? I think this is a desk because that's what you're using it for. This is an imperfect representation. In the realm of the forms, there's a perfect representation of everything, and it is the philosopher that sees these things clearly. There are others that we could talk about in terms of ancient philosophical thought, and I will touch on another one in just a minute. The way I've organized this lecture is we move after this into modern ethical theory, and then I will jump back to Socrates' most famous, or Plato's most famous student. So we'll go back to the ancients because it's an emerging, it was a philosophy that lost a lot of sort of following, but has reemerged in this idea of corporate social responsibility as being very attractive. But just to sort of touch on how Socrates has influenced things in the modern world, Socrates and Plato influenced St. Augustine of Hippo. And again, students say, what is St. Augustine of Hippo, who wrote in the, I think, 6th century BCE, which stands before the Common Era. We used to call that AD, which stands for Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord. So we have BCE, before the Common Era, then CE, which is the Common Era, which is now, or what people used to call AD. I'm sorry, I misspoke. So we have BC, which used to be before Christ, then AD, Anno Domini. They now, modern historians call it BCE and CE. And St. Augustine of Hippo was actually in this book again, in I think the 5th century of the Common Era. So the Roman Empire in the 4th century CE is led by a guy named Constantine. He converts the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity. Shortly thereafter, he sees a sign. He is leading the Roman Empire is split, and he's having a war. There's an eastern half and a western half. And Constantine sees a vision of a cross, and the vision says to him that in this sign he shall unite the Roman Empire and lead it to greatness. And so he converts to Christianity. And then after Constantine, Rome is sacked by the Visigoths. And people start to say, look, because they worshiped the emperor as a god. And the old gods, this Christianity thing, this is the reason that we're having these problems. Because early Christianity was pacifist. Right? The only thing that Jesus adds to the body of theology that's new, really, is this idea of turn the other cheek. So it takes a remarkable person to come up and sort of reconcile this problem that they're having with the sack of Rome in the fall of the Roman Empire, and this convert to Christianity, someone who'd been a pagan, whose mother was a Christian, and then he sees the light and converts, named Augustine of Hippo, comes along and he writes something called the City of God, and he uses Platonic philosophy to justify what they call just war. And he uses the rationalization or the rationale of Socratic thought in the City of God to allow Christians to not be pacifists, to fight for justice. Now, how has this influenced the modern world, and why do I talk about this? And there are others that we can talk about that came after Socrates. Why do I talk about Augustine? Well, because you see these kinds of arguments being made all the time, particularly in our political marketing today, right? Donald Trump assassinated an Iranian general, and that argument that he makes, and he will make in his political marketing, will be on this idea of just war. And that goes back to Constantine. We can look at an ad. I'll show you one that George W. Bush used, for example.
In an increasingly dangerous world, even after the first terrorist attack on America, John Kerry and the liberals in Congress voted to slash America's intelligence operations by $6 billion. Cuts so deep they would have weakened America's defenses. And weakness attracts those who are waiting to do America harm.
I'm George W. Bush, and I approve this message.
So,
In an increase,
what you see there is this idea from Augustine. What constitutes a just war? Well, a just war is fought in defense of self. You can fight to defend yourself. You can fight in defense of others or in the cause of justice. So what would be the fighting for the cause of justice? the ending of slavery in the American Civil War. That would be a just war. The fight by the Northerners to end in slavery. Modern ethical theory really begins with Machiavelli. Machiavelli is called the first modern man. And every president, with the exception of George W. Bush and Donald Trump, have read at least one of Machiavelli's greatest works, which is The Prince. And why is Machiavelli called the first modern man? When you read Machiavelli's The Prince, you get a separation of the secular and the sacred for the first time, and it's applied to government. And Machiavelli says, for example, in The Prince, that what's ethical for a prince is not what's ethical. For example, lying. Lying is never for a prince a priori unethical. If the prince needs to lie in order to maintain the state, well, then that's okay. And so what you get in Machiavelli is he never comes up with this formulation specifically, but what you can tease out of, he never says it specifically in The Prince, but what you can tease out of The Prince is the formulation, the ends justify the means. Right? That's what you get. In other words, if the prince needs to lie in order to protect the integrity of the state, and that works out good, then that's okay. If the prince needs to be a brutal killer, again, in order to protect the integrity of the state, that's okay. Morality for the prince is different than morality for you or I. Machiavelli talks about different kinds of princes. He says, depending on how you became a prince, affects the way you'll have to govern. So it's what you get in Machiavelli is a very calculated analysis of what it takes to get what you want in the most efficient manner. This is picked up by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, and it becomes utilitarian ethics, which is the
Utilitarian problems with you.
Sound that off. So, utilitarian ethics, this idea is picked up by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, and utilitarian ethics is the one that business students like the most. Now, there are problems with it, and we'll talk about what the problems with it are, but it is a valid theory. And why is it valid? Well, because it's based on reason, it's not based on emotion. It allows for the universal principles to be developed based on that reason, and it allows for no exceptions. So utilitarian ethics, based on this Machiavellian idea, and by the way, if you say somebody is Machiavellian, generally you mean that they're less than ethical. So it's interesting that we use this and business students like it, but people will say all the time, oh, he's such a Machiavellian. And what they generally mean is that you're not scrupulous, that you'll do anything to accomplish your goals. And I think Machiavelli gets a bad rap on that because The Prince is a very thin, pithy work by Machiavelli. His greatest work is probably the discourses on the first 12 books of Titus Livy. And in that, he has a completely different philosophy worked out than what The Prince is. The Prince is a work that he wrote just to try and get his job back, basically. He was a fairly high-ranking official and an ambassador in the Florentine Republic. during a period when the Medici were out of power. When the Medici come back to power, Machiavelli loses his job, and he attempts to get it back by writing the Prince for the Medici's consumption, and basically to try and say, hey, I would be a good, loyal servant. He dedicates it to Lorenzo Medici, I believe he was Lorenzo, and he doesn't actually get his job back. But this work lays the foundation, this idea of the ends justify the means for modern utilitarian theory, which is what is picked up and is used by, of course, capitalists. Because capitalism, the foundations of capitalistic economics are not the greatest happiness principle, but the maximization of utility. That's what economists will tell you. What does that mean? By the way, if you want to get a worthless degree, I guess I shouldn't say this since our current interim dean is an economist. If you want to get a completely worthless degree, get a degree in economics that just renames things that we all understand intuitively with fancy terms. So economists talk about the maximization of utility. What does that mean? What does it mean to maximize utility? Sounds
Maximize your happiness.
well. That's from an ethical perspective, yes. But what do you want to get in economic terms? So what can you get for $1?
Anything from the dollar.
4 gumballs. 4 gumballs. What?
You said anything from the dollar store.
Anything from the dollar store. Okay. What? You work hard. How many of you have a job? Almost everybody in here has a job. How much do you make an hour? Anybody mind telling me? $14.25 an hour. Okay. You work hard for that, right? I mean, if you make $14.25 an hour, that's a hell of a lot better than minimum wage. It's double. It's a little more than double. Well, not quite, right? Because I guess minimum wage is $7.25, so it'd have to be $14.50 to be double. So you're slightly under half minimum wage. But that you work hard for that. And so you want to get the most that you can get for your money as a result, right? What do you want to, you got to stretch that dollar to get the most bang for your buck. That's what maximization of utility is. The idea is that in a perfect system, people who want a scarce resource will pay the most for it, and they'll put it to the highest and best use. Now, this doesn't always work because there are what we call, in a theoretical perspective, this should work, but there are what we call marketing failures or market failures. And when does a market failure occur? Well, market failures occur when people have an incentive to take advantage and maybe degrade the system in ways, and this is illustrated by something called the tragedy of the commons. So, and there's a game you can play. I think it's still up on, let's see. No, that's there used to be a game. There used to be a game that you could play called the bunny game, and what it does is it has 2 rounds of the game, and you take bunnies and you try and sell them. So in the first round, you play against a computer, or you can play against somebody else. Everybody has an incentive to grab as many bunnies as they can because they're not segregated into personal property. And so what ends up happening at the end of the round is that in order to have bunnies to sell in the next round, you have to have bunnies that can reproduce from the first round. And in the first round, in the first portion of the game, there are no bunnies left because either you, your opponent, or the computer will grab all of the bunnies because you have the incentive to take all of the bunnies, right? And then there are no bunnies left to make more bunnies. In the second version of the game, you have a segregated pen and you have some bunnies in it, and everybody else has some bunnies. And there are 2 rounds. And so you take bunnies and you sell them, and then you have to have some bunnies left, and everybody ends up with some bunnies left because they need them for the second round of the game, right? So this idea of the tragedy of the commons actually originates from a real thing that happened in the United States, and you can see this in New York City to this day. There is a portion of Central Park where the Tavern on the Green, which is a very famous restaurant, which closed for a while and is now reopened, that was a sheep pasture. And what do people have the incentive to do? So everybody could graze their sheep on the commons. Well, what happens to sheep and goats? They're very similar. What happens? Anybody had a goat? We had pet goats when I was a kid. We had everything. My parents bought us everything that you could buy. We had a whole little menagerie, a whole little farm. We had horses and cattle. And I grew up in a cattle ranch in northern New Mexico. And we had goats as well, so we thought they would be cute. And we wanted to show goats and sheep and for 4-H and FFA. Cows. Goats and sheep are particularly problematic animals in terms of grazing. Anybody had a goat? Nobody's had a goat. I can tell we're getting further and further. When I first started teaching 27 years ago, I had lots of students that were, farm kids who participated in FFA and 4-H and stuff like that. Now I don't have so many. Well, goats will eat anything. They will strip the land, and sheep will too. So you put enough of them out there, and if you don't have a large enough piece of land, what ends up happening to the land? Well, it becomes denuded because they will rip things they'll rip the grass out of the soil, and they'll eat it until there's nothing left, and you'll be dry logged. Very, very. You get a couple goats, they can clear. In fact, they use goats. When I was on city council in Guthrie, we used to hire people that would bring goats out to eat our dam. We have a dam in Guthrie for water supply. We have 2 lakes, Guthrie Lake and Liberty Lake. And it's hard to mow on a dam. They've got steep walls. Get some goats. They'll have that down in no time. Right? You got to pull them off because you don't want the grass to be totally gone. But in no time flat, goats can mow a yard, right? So on these sheep commons, everybody has an incentive to put as many sheep out there as they can. And what ends up happening? Well, everybody's worse off as a result of that. As a result of damage to the common, everybody ends up worse off because your sheep then are thin, right? Or your goats are thin, and they don't have as much meat on them because everybody's put as many sheep out there as they can possibly buy, and you've left with nothing. So there are these market failures, but in theory, and market failures occur where we have what are called public goods. In theory, the maximization of utility says that if we have, private goods, we have an incentive to protect those goods so that we will put them to the highest and best use. Now, there are, again, market failures. Air pollution is another one, right? We all have, air is free. We all breathe it. And companies that engage in textile manufacturing, for example, or electric generation in Oklahoma is largely done by coal burning power plants. That destroys the air, and they have no real incentive to not do that because it's not a private good. So we have this market failure. So utilitarianism is the foundation of capitalist thought. And in capitalist terms, you want to maximize your utility. You want to stretch that 1425 as far as you can. And in ethical terms, it's the greatest happiness principle. Rather than stretching your dollar, you want to maximize happiness. Or if you can't do that, you want to minimize pain. Now, the reason that this doesn't allow for exceptionalism is that the greatest happiness is not my happiness personally or my family's happiness. It is the greatest happiness. What is the best for everybody? What is the best outcome for everybody? So actions are ethical based on results. No act in and of itself is a priori wrong. Lying is not a priori wrong. If good things happen as a result of lying and everybody's better off, well, that's okay. Now, what could be wrong with this? The greatest happiness principle. What might be wrong with this? Again, it's a valid ethical theory because it's rational. You're going to have to do in every action, you're going to have to calculate what is going to bring about the greatest amount of happiness for everybody. So in thinking about this classroom, I have to think about, well, although you may not like it, what should I discuss and what should I impart, what knowledge should I impart to you that will allow you to go out into the world and be productive human beings? I could spend a lot more time in this class, for example, talking about very abstract theories of philosophy, which I like, or I can sort of give you the nuts and bolts of it, right? I mean, I could spend my time literally reading Republic to you in here. It would be a painful exercise because there's probably nothing worse than being read to. Or I could do even worse, I could read Aristotle for you. That would be really boring. Or Kant. I've often thought that the perfect punishment for recalcitrant students who fall asleep in my class would be for me to force them to stay awake while I read Kant's Metaphysics of Morals very, very slowly. There's a movie that most of you have probably not seen called Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Ferris Bueller's Day Off. In Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Ben Stein plays one of the teachers at Ferris's high school. Ben Stein has notoriously sort of monotone voice. Bueller, Ferris, Bueller, Ferris, Bueller. I had a teacher like this once in college. I'll never forget his name. His name was Whit Marks. I started referring to him as half-wit Marks because he would start, it was University of Physical Science, and he could write with both hands. And he would stand here at the board and he would write with both hands, just going. All these formulas, and then at the end of 75 minutes, he would turn around and beam like he had done something. And perhaps he had. He had his own little math party up here, but totally failed to explain that to anyone in the room, what he was doing up there. So, I've got to figure out what's the correct balance of giving you some philosophy that you can use to analyze situations that you'll face in the real world, right? I've got to come up with that and try to find the best way to impart that. And at the end of this exercise, hopefully you're all better off. Hopefully, for those of you that are sales students and in the sales program, this will allow you to think more critically. It will allow you to come up with answers when you have objections from your clients, because you've thought about these things you will be better able to engage at an intellectual level your clients or customers and come back when they come up with an objection. You'll be able to think about things really rationally and say, well, that's really not a valid objection, right? I mean, I can show you how this is going to benefit you and why you need this product or service. But I've got to do that as balance. This is not a purely philosophical class. Although I would probably enjoy being a philosophy professor more, they only make, as I told you before, my requirements were, the average starting salary for a philosophy professor is $32,000 a year. It's lower than a political scientist. Sucks to be them, right? I mean, you get a PhD and you make less than a high school English teacher starting out. So I had to kind of come up with this. And that seems to be a reasonable approach, doesn't it? Is there ever a problem with this? Is there ever a problem with utilitarian ethics, finding the greatest happiness? Well, then we've got to minimize the pain, right? And I tried to do that in this class. The way I minimize the pain is as I'm talking about these things that are really tough, I throw in these little stories that make you laugh, right? I had a student on my student evaluations, I think I told you this, say I'm not funny. Yeah, I am. Right? I'm hysterical. Trust me. In fact, I had one student say, after I had said that, he put on my student evaluations the next semester, he's Dane Cook funny. I had no idea who Dane Cook was. I had to go look him up. So, I throw in these little things that keep you entertained and engage your mind. And isn't that all great? Well, or at least it minimizes the pain, the mind-numbing pain that you have from having to think about these things. Are there ever problems with this? Last time I think we watched, was it in this class or was it in my, because I teach them back to back, I forget. Did we watch the Eatocracy film on chocolate in here? No. Okay. Save it.
No one ever said it would be this hard. Oh, take me back to
The Windsors, Inside the Royal Dynasty, premieres Sunday at 10 on CNN.
His report is part of CNN's Freedom Project. It's a commitment to helping end modern-day slavery. The bitter truth behind the chocolate in your Easter basket. It is one of the lead stories on CNN's Utilitarian website. It's managing editor, Kat Kinsman. She's joining us from New York. So, first of all, it's a lot of people would not suspect that this is happening, that this is taking place. If you're buying chocolate, how do you know whether or not it's actually contributing to child slavery, like the little boy we saw there?
Well, this is really disturbing and new information to a lot of people, and especially since we're coming up upon Easter, which worldwide is the biggest chocolate buying time of the year. We thought we would come up with a list of tips that people can look at to help guide them towards slavery-free chocolate. The first one would be to go organic. There's very little chance that any organic chocolate that you're going to buy is going to be made with slave labor. The trees are generally, on the average, 25 years old and not grown under organic practices, and they're not planting new ones. So that's a really great route to go. You should start to consider the origin of where your chocolate is coming from. And if you're looking, because of the Harkin-Engel Act, it's a little bit easier to find out the origins of the cocoa that is used in your chocolate. So while it might be coming from Asia or from a few other places, it might not be perfect, but it's better than chocolate you're going to find coming from the Ivory Coast. Now, another thing you can do is to look at the labels. Ethically sourced chocolate is generally going to have a stamp on it that says that it's either Rainforest Association certified or that it's fair trade certified. So look at the label and empower yourself that way. And actually, one of my favorite routes to go is to really go to the local chocolatiers that are springing up all around the country, because so many of them have a very direct relationship with the people who are growing the chocolate. And the fewer links in the supply chain, the more accountability there is. And the fewer people who are trying to make a buck off the chain. And they're really working with the farmers directly to get them the best price possible. And they're really going to be happy to work with you to develop a taste for this kind of chocolate.
And Kat, that's great. I mean, I've got a chocolate place in my own neighborhood that just sprung up. So I know this is pretty popular. Do we have a sense of whether or not this chocolate is like the kind of chocolate we grew up with, and if it's more or less expensive?
You know, it may not be exactly like the chocolate you grew up with, but as Kristen Hart from Cacao Atlanta likes to say, one taste and you get it, maybe two tastes. So it might not have quite the butterfat content in it that you're used to, or actually, sorry, the cocoa fat content, but we challenged our iReporters to come up with recipes that would make people really just sense what was wonderful about this chocolate. We got everything from sourdough chocolate recipes to chocolate soup to chocolate cookies. People really put their heart and soul into emphasizing what is beautiful about this chocolate. So what you're really looking for is chocolate that is of great quality, but also makes a difference in the quality of people's lives.
That's great. That's a delicious combination there. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, so what this video highlights is that a very small number of people in the world are engaged in being enslaved in the chocolate industry. From a purely utilitarian perspective, you could justify that slavery because a very small number of people are unhappy and they're enslaved to make this chocolate. But aren't we all happier? I mean, one of the things that we know is that chocolate, when you eat it, it fires the same neurosensors in the brain that you get when you take a drink of whiskey, when you smoke the cigarette, when you try the cocaine, all of those things. It has the same, so and by the way, there is some evidence to suggest that chocolate is not milk chocolate, but dark chocolate is good for your heart. So if we enslave a small number of people to do this, aren't we all happier? We all get our Kit Kat or our Reese's, and we get this little sense of pleasure out of it, and aren't we all better off? You could justify slavery. It's perfectly rational. So, it just sucks to be you, but the rest of us are all so much better off, right? Because we've got our chocolate. As a result of this kind of argument, there's an attempt to fix. Again, this is a valid ethical theory because it allows for, application of universal rules and principles. We're going to find the greatest happiness. If we don't have chocolate, we're all worse off. So we're going to enslave a few people to make the chocolate. And, maybe they're better off because if there wasn't slavery in the Ivory Coast making this chocolate, well, that economy would be worse off than it is today. So a second form of utilitarianism. So the first form of utilitarianism, or purest form of utilitarianism, is what we might call act utilitarianism. Act utility. And what act utility says is that every situation, we have to analyze the facts of the situation and come up with the correct answer. Now, one of the things that's problematic about this is not just the fact that we could justify slavery, a small number. We can't have large numbers of people enslaved, but we could justify slavery in the American South, for example, because, cotton is a necessary item. We all have to have it. I would be willing to bet that 99.999% of you are wearing something of cotton in this class, right? Some of you are wearing synthetics, but you're wearing some cotton. Okay? And aren't we all better off? I mean, we are warmer as a result of the fact that we have this cotton. And wasn't that just a great thing? Well, a lot of us say that's just kind of creepy. Right? Like enslaving people is kind of creepy. You shouldn't do it. It's wrong. Act utilitarianism allows for this. We're going to go out and conquer people in a just war, and to the victor go the spoils. That's how the Greeks got slaves, by the way, right? They conquered people and they got slaves and brought them back. But it was a very, very delicate balance. They had to limit the number of slaves because it affected the overall economy. But they got this pretty right, Well, a lot of us just say that no, that's just a priori wrong. As a result, the second form of utilitarianism pops up. That's called rule utilitarianism. And what rule utility says is that, look, we can't, the extent of human experience is such that we can develop principles that in a discrete situation might not produce the greatest happiness, but by and large, on the whole, over time, produce the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people, if we follow the rules. What's an example of this? Let's think about this for a minute. I'll come up with a business example. Let's suppose that you have a drug. You're the manufacturer of a drug. It's very hard to manufacture this drug, but it saves lives. Let's suppose that in our current hysteria, you have come up with a cure for the coronavirus. Now, it turns out there's a lot of hysteria involving the coronavirus. What's the death toll of the coronavirus, by the way, worldwide, of those people who've gotten it and are infected? I mean, we've got this hysteria. They're shutting down places. They're going door to door. As you're coughing, the entire class.
Yeah, I did stay away for a little while though.
Right, what's the actual death toll? So they're going door to door in China, and they're wearing these masks, and they're shooting people. Not shooting. They're using these heat-sensing guns to determine whether or not the individual has a fever, and if they are, they're sealing off the whole building, and it's affecting the economy. Bad. What's the actual death toll of this?
40,000.
No, the percentage.
1%.
It's 3%.
Yeah, I know.
Right. I mean, it's like 3%. Right. Yeah, 3% of the people who have it so far have died. Right. I mean, like the death toll, it's slightly worse than the flu, but not much. Right. So we're having this mass hysteria over this. But let's suppose that it's much more deadly than it actually is. Let's suppose the death toll is 60%. Right? Let's suppose that the death toll, if you get coronavirus, is 60%. Well, and you get this drug that's going to cure it. Right? How are you going to distribute the drug? But it's very difficult to make, very limited supplies. How are you going to distribute the drug? Well, in a perfect economic system, or in a purely capitalistic economic system, how are you going to distribute the drug? He who has the most money is going to get the drug. Let's suppose that currently you have 5 doses of the drug, and it's going to be months before you get more doses of the drug because it takes that long to manufacture. It requires the extract of a thistle seed that is very rare and only grows, above the tree line in Colorado, and there are goats that are eating the thistle. These darn mountain goats. Now let's further suppose that here are the people, you've got 5 doses of the drug that are infected with the disease that are coming to you. There's you. You're currently infected with the drug, or with the virus. I'm sorry, currently infected with the virus. There's Mother Teresa. There's Donald Trump. There's me, your college professor. Who else should we put in the vote?
Let's put in Gandhi.
Gandhi. So we've got Mother Teresa and Gandhi both. And some homeless guy named Bob. Okay. So how many people do we have? 6. How are we going to determine who gets the drug? Well, Mother Teresa is going to say, I'll forego the drug out of Christian love and mercy. Now, this is not going to work. Okay? The woman is a saint. These people don't come along every day. You're going to need them. Who else? Who should we deny the drug to? How do you do this? Do you see what we're doing here? We're attempting to put a value. I used to do this when George W. Bush was president, and students would overwhelmingly say, deny George W. Bush, because they've gotten a little bit more liberal here. When I first started teaching, all of my students were overwhelmingly Republicans. Your generation has tended to be more liberal than the previous generation. Well, let's deny to Donald Trump, right? Well, no, he's the president of the United States, the leader of the free world. You can't do that, right? So how do you decide? The problem with doing this is that you're putting a value on a human life, and it's just a little creepy. Now, there is another degree program that you can get. You can get it here. We're the only ones that have it, called actuarial science, that does this, that puts values on human lives. And they will tell you things like, I am worth more than you. That may not be true of my sales students once they graduate, but because I am a high income producer, because I have both a JD and a PhD, and I own a lot of property, I'm worth more money than you are, and I have a higher value. It's called actuarial science. They figure out risks and values to everything. They'll tell you a child with a birth defect is worth less than a child without a birth defect. And this is creepy. It's creepy. And so rule utilitarianism attempts to fix this problem by saying, look, we'll apply rules, right? Which is what would be a rule that we could come up with? Well, whoever was the first to walk in the door, we give everyone the drug equally until we run out. So if you're first in line, that's a rule, right? We can follow that rule. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, or Donald Trump, or the homeless guy named Bob. We're going to apply the rule fairly and equitably. First one in the door, we have it. Second one in the door, we have it. Third one in the door, yep, we have it. Fourth, fifth, sixth, sorry. but we've applied the rule equitably. Now in this discrete situation, maybe we have not, let's suppose that the sixth one in the door is Mother Teresa. Again, maybe we haven't provided the greatest happiness in this discrete situation, because not giving it to Mother Teresa, she's dead now, by the way. Right? She's gone. But when she was alive, she provided comfort and aid and help to thousands of people. How many of you can say that you're going to do the same? No, right? You're not. The reason that you're a business student is because you want to go out and you're not in this for the charity. So in that situation, maybe we haven't provided the greatest happiness because we've denied Mother Teresa, but on the whole, if we apply this principle in the aggregate, we will achieve better results, which means that we're not having to engage in this kind of ad hoc evaluation of what a human life is worth, right? So we'll develop rules that say things like, first come, first serve. That seems fair and equitable. So rule utilitarian attempts to fix the problems that you have with act utilitarianism. There are still problems even with rule utilitarianism in that we could develop rules that are based on reason that we would say, no, let's not do that. That's sort of creepy, right? But let's not do that. It's just not acceptable. In response to, and I guess I'm out of time, so we'll talk about duty ethics next time. And then we'll move into virtue ethics, which means we'll go back to Aristotle. And then we'll talk about marketing theory. And then we'll talk about corporate social responsibility. So that's where we're sort of headed. All right? And I did pass a roll sheet, right? So if you didn't sign it, you came in late or whatever, make sure that you sign that. And I will. Tuesday, yeah.